I appear to have lost the go live button. Which is very strange.
Definitely said it's live on YouTube on the top left corner, but then it's still saying a practice session. So,
yeah, I have lost the go live button. Let me just try and push that back up because I have no idea where the big button is. There it is. Oh gosh, what a panic, ladies and gentlemen. I can only apologize for the 2 minutes delay. As you can see, I've not even had time to exchange my uniform for some casual attire. And then, just to make things even worse, I couldn't even find a go live button. Welcome to my world. And welcome to this CPDme webinar. My name is Andrew Ormerod, and I will be facilitating this webinar tonight. And I will shortly be handing you over to Phil Harper, Rethinking Gender and Dementia, Combating the Over-Pathologization of Gender Non-Conformity. So, without further ado, some webinar facts. We can't see or hear you. So if you are sat there in your dressing gown or you're sat there in your nightwear, please don't worry because we can't see you, and equally we can't hear you. But we can hear you if you want to ask any questions. So you can please use the Q&A box for any questions you have for Phil, and equally you can use the chat box to tell us where you're dialing in from tonight and also maybe what you do for a job. If you are a member of CPDme, of course, you will get a CPD certificate that will arrive around 10 o'clock in the morning. And of course, everybody will also get access to a recording of tonight's event, which also is being live streamed to YouTube. And again, once your CPD certificates come out, they will automatically add to your CPDme portfolio. It'll be sat in your entries option, and you can simply just go in there then and click and edit to complete the CPD circle. If you are on Twitter, please do follow us on social media at CPDme. And of course, if you do tag us in tonight, please tag us in with hashtag CPDMadeSimple. Maybe take us a picture of where you're learning from. Maybe you're sat in your living room having your tea with this broad screen broadcast onto your big screen, or maybe you're sat in the kitchen watching it on your iPad. So send us a snap, copy us in on Twitter, and I'll make sure I give you a big like. If you're not a member of CPDme and like me, you struggled recording and keeping an accurate record of your CPD, which of course, if you are like me, you'll be registered with the governing body. CPDme is a super simple solution, and I created this back in 2009 to allow healthcare professionals, specifically in health and social care world, to accurately keep a record, and more importantly, capture certificates and everything else that goes with it in one place. And then when it comes to building a portfolio or interview or appraisal, you can pull it off in a couple of clicks. So please do consider joining. It's £1.99 for a 30-day trial. And for that, you get all your CPD certificates for our 80 live webinars, as well as access to over 360 previously broadcast webinars, all again with automatic CPD certificates. So there really are some tangible benefits. So you can either scan that QR code or jump over to cpdme.com. If you're not subscribed to us on YouTube, every time we go live, you'll get a notification. And also we put on there some quirky little videos now and again that we don't broadcast anywhere else. So please do consider subscribing to us at YouTube. And all you need to do is go to youtube.com/CPDme. You know I like a good competition, so we've got two £25 Amazon vouchers to give away tonight to anybody who leaves us a review on either Trustpilot, on Google, or of course on the app stores, either Android or iPhone. So if you use the system and you enjoy it, please do leave us a positive review. If you're not too sure, mediocre, it doesn't have to be 4-star, 5-star. Please just be honest and integral. That's all we ask of you. And then tonight at the end, I will draw a voucher for £25. So we'll pick a winner who's on live tonight. And then for those people who do it overnight, I'll do one live on Twitter tomorrow for those people who don't get a chance. If you're a CPD champion, then please do consider downloading our poster. And again, you can capture that from our website, and it allows you to share all of our up and coming CPD with all of your colleagues at work or within your workplace. So you just need to scan that QR code or just type in the word CPDme poster in good old Dr. Google, and you will of course find us. And if you haven't downloaded our CPDme app, it's completely free of charge to download. Please download it from the App Store. It will also make recording your CPD simple, along with registering for these CPD webinars even easier. So without a further ado, we're going to go live over to Phil. Are you there, Phil?
Hello, yes, thank you, Andrew.
Fabulous.
So, fantastic. Let me just share my screen or share. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'm going to be exploring a little bit about gender neutrality and non-conformity and dementia. So particularly looking at this as a valid expression and moving away from very heteronormative and biological assumptions around gender. This is, so I use they them pronouns, and if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can. It's at Phineas Fogg. You can see the spelling there. As I said, you can always contact me. You can always send me any messages after this or anything I can help with. So this presentation really is a milestone for me for what I'm doing my literature review. So I'm doing my PhD at the moment, where I'm looking at gender neutrality and this as a valid expression within dementia care settings, and looking at particularly microaggressions, which I've explored before, and looking at these ideas within dementia care settings. So really this presentation is an overview of some of the literature I found, and really the areas that need the gaps need filling, and me applying dementia care to some of the more generic literature as well with my PhD as well. So what I'm going to do at the moment is I'm just going to turn my video off, only because my internet is a little bit unstable at the moment, and hopefully they'll make it a bit more stable. So if I do go, that is why, but I will turn it back on at the end for any questions. So to give a bit of an introduction, and if you've been to any of my other webinars, you will have seen this slide pretty much at every time, because it's really the only statistics we currently really have. And it's really to give the idea of particularly older gay and lesbian people in the UK, and to really say that actually numbers are fairly high, and there's a high likelihood we'll have fairly high numbers of gay and lesbian people living with dementia. However, there are really next to no statistics on gender diverse people. So really this area that I'm looking at is a really underserved and under-researched area. It's a very difficult area to really start seeing the scale with. However, we are seeing more people coming out as being non-binary, gender non-conforming, etc. And when I use gender non-conforming, I mean non-conforming to the gender norms of the binary. It has many different meanings. So some people who are non-binary will say that they are gender conforming, because if they're gender neutral, they conform to the gender that they identify as. So there are many different meanings for gender non-conformity. However, the way that I'm proposing is that it's not conforming to binary stereotypical gender that we have in the Western world particularly. So that is my way of using it. And actually, there is very little research, and we'll start exploring some of these concepts now, really looking at this area of focus. So some of the key things that I've found is that dementia care does degender individuals due to an overemphasis on cognitive decline and ableist assumptions. So here we're looking at this over-pathologization We're looking at somebody living with dementia having this cognitive decline, and maybe this is why somebody is not presenting in a gendered way, or we look at we ignore somebody's gender, we erase somebody's gender. Now, this is something that generally happens. We kind of see the dementia first and the person second, which is the opposite to what somebody called Tom Kitwood used to say we should be seeing. But this is what happens. So really, we don't always have this person-centered approach. And this is particularly the case around gender. And it really puts gender neutrality on a bad foot, because then it actually makes many people believe that gender neutrality is this erasure of gender. But then also at the same time, gender neutrality in itself, and in one way non-binary maybe gender, can often be seen as a symptom of dementia in itself and can be erased. I'm just making this clear distinction between gender and sex here. I think that is quite important. When we talk about sex assigned at birth or somebody's sex, we're talking about what somebody was assigned or told they were at birth, mainly based on biology, whereas gender is what somebody identifies as somebody becomes. So they are two distinct things. They do have influence on each other, but they are two distinct things. So I'm going to be talking a lot about gender more because in the area of LGBTQ plus research and support, particularly transgender studies, we particularly want to focus on what somebody identifies as and who somebody actually is, not just what was assigned at birth. So that is why I'll talk more about gender. And when we talk about gender neutrality, that's particularly what this focuses on, is that concept of gender. Another thing we often have is the heterosexual matrix. So here we're really looking at this heteronormativity. So if you've been to one of my microaggression webinars, you will definitely hear me talk about heteronormativity and really looking at things through a very heterosexual view and lens. And this is really what we need to break down as well. And when we look at gender and how people perform their gender, so somebody called Butler, who's a key theorist within gender studies and sexuality studies, says that we all perform our gender based on societal norms. And it's very much influenced by the likes of Foucault, Goffman, etc., who both really talk about labeling and performative nature of who we are and identity. And Butler really applies this to your gender and says that we have performativity. So we perform this. Butler kind of introduces the idea that we're all, in one way, drag artists. And sometimes we need to break down that people only perform within a binary or in a heterosexual, cisgendered way. So we need to break down that actually it's okay to be queer gendered and to actually have a different gender presentation. And even in dementia care, and unfortunately, in dementia care, as with many health and social care related disciplines or areas, etc., this heterosexual matrix, it's far more prevalent. And it's partly due to the medical view that actually we mostly focus on the medical aspect, so the condition like the dementia, and the person second. We start to lose some of these nuances. So this is something we need to think about. We've got normative discourse that impacts how a person performs their gender. So quite often you've got this view that somebody living with dementia is helpless. They are the victim. They are very passive in their decisions, etc. If we look at the messages that we get about people with dementia, we all hear doom and gloom, etc. But actually, somebody living with dementia could sometimes free people's opinions, make people feel more comfortable, be their authentic self, etc. So somebody isn't always helpless. Actually, dementia might actually, in a short period of time, or for a certain point in time, help somebody. So we need to actually not look at somebody as being helpless, but actually actively being able to present their true gender and actually then support somebody with that. So again, building upon this, that dementia can enable somebody to perform their gender in a more authentic way. And we need to appreciate that actually dementia can sometimes do that. And that fits very much in with that not feeling helpless before. Much of the work around gender dementia has a binary focus. More work is needed with this non-conformist, this gender-neutral approach, but not as a negative view. And this will be really a recurrent theme. So when I've been really accessing the literature, really digging deep, and also speaking with people, I've been speaking with people who I've been working on working groups together with. I was on a LGBTQ plus working group with Alzheimer's Europe, and I was speaking with all the people, and there's only one other person, who's Sandelberg here, who was on that working group, and they're the only other person who I know has really been looking at this area as well. So it's something that really needs a lot more focus. And particularly that article that I was talking about from Sonnenberg really touches around presenting gender through clothing and how this might disrupt the gender binary, and looking at allowing somebody to dress themselves, and if they are presenting in gender neutral way, and if they do want gender neutral clothing, this might not be a failure. This might not be somebody struggling to dress themselves. This might be a very valid presentation. So that article, particularly that one, and the others do touch on it, actually really focuses on, there needs to be more focus on this, and actually this could be something that needs and is happening. So this is really a key overview here, really, of some of the things that we really want to be exploring, and what I want to focus on, and what the literature is telling me. I started looking at some of the early research, so particularly some of the trans and dementia research that's out there, because gender neutral, non-binary identities, gender queer, gender fluid, etc., a lot of these identities that come under the non-binary banner that generally are synonymous with gender neutrality do come under the trans community, because a lot of people don't identify as the sex they're assigned at birth. So I started to look at trans and dementia and the research, because there was a little bit of research, not much, but a little bit out there. However, what I found is that actually this done the opposite to what I thought it was going to do. I thought it was going to really break this heterosexual cisgendered matrix and really make us think differently about gender. Whereas actually, no, it just reinforced it, because it's very much talking about how somebody goes from point A to point B, so like either male to female or female to male, and actually just only focuses really on that. It doesn't discuss other gender diverse people. And it really looks at the medical body and looks at the physical body, and it over focuses really on the physical body. And it also quite often, there's this assumption that somebody forgets their gender identity, whereas we know this isn't true, because somebody's gender identity, who they feel they are, has actually been with them a lot longer than when they've actually been able to express who they are. So actually, it's more that somebody forgets their physical body and expression, not actually who they are. So these are some of the issues that I found with some of the more early and even some current trans and dementia studies now. So while this is one of the closest bodies of work to really the area that I want to focus in, it's actually not really helping the area that I do want to focus on. And we've got some of these issues that comes from this. Another thing that I found, so I came across this really interesting study by Bartlett and her team of researchers, and they very much looked at the idea of gender in dementia care, and they do very much look at gender neutrality. However, they state that dementia care is gender neutral due to erasure, which is something that I discussed a little bit about, and they say that quite often everything's looked at in a very medical view. People with dementia, people living with dementia, we are erasing gender. We're not saying females with dementia, we're not saying women with dementia, men with dementia. And this is a really valid point. And I think this does raise some really interesting questions. Do we look at cognitive issues? Do we look at disability in general? And does this take away somebody's gender? And there's loads of really interesting discussions around this. So, for example, disabled toilets. You don't get gender disabled toilets. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the future is gender neutral toilets wise, but it's quite interesting how when we have had gender toilets, disabled toilets have always been gender neutral. So in one way you are erasing gender. It's not because it's being progressive, it's because really we've erased gender away from disabled people. So there's some really interesting discussions around this, and it's really the same argument really, is that actually when somebody has a condition such as dementia, quite often we take away somebody's identity with it. And going back to that quote with Kitwood, where you should see the person first and dementia second, this is not what's happening. But my critique of this article, so these are very valid points, really interesting points. My critique is that actually it does not appreciate that gender neutrality is maybe what some people might want to be. And it only speaks about gender neutrality as being erasing somebody's identity, and doesn't have any awareness that actually people are gender neutral by choice, and that gender neutrality might be a valid expression. Now, not for everybody, and just to make the key point here as well, that not everybody who's, for example, non-binary, etc., is gender neutral or androgynous, etc. However, it should be a valid point that actually a lot of the community are, and a lot of the LGBTQ plus community are non-conformist in how they present their gender. And quite often, when we look at different gender presentation, there's a lot of erasure around that from some of the things we've been speaking about. So really, it would be nice to see some articles who are really fighting for the gendered world and for fighting for different genders to start including non-binary gender expression, gender identities, etc., and actually not just viewing it through that heterosexual matrix of the binary male and female, that actually and stereotypical male and female. So that is really these have got some really valid points with this research and some other research similar to this. However, many of them don't really look at it outside of the heterosexual cisgendered experience. So that's really my call here, is to actually, can we apply the same concepts, but can we think of these in a more queer way, let's say? And then I've started to really look at intersectionality, because this is something that's really important to me. And I think it's really valid to when we're looking at dementia and LGBTQ stuff, because we've got many different intersections going on really there. You could have age, disability, sexuality, gender identity, and then you could have race, etc., gender, etc. Many others that are going on here as well. So I wanted to read a bit more into intersectionality, and just as an introduction, as I'm sure most people probably know what intersectionality is, but it's the concept of intersectionality describe the ways which systems of inequality based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, class, and other forms of discrimination intersect to create unique dynamics and effects. So really, this is just where people have multiple parts of their identity that create unique experiences. So this really highlights, so some of those issues with trans and dementia studies focusing on the binary, being over medical, it's not really being very intersectional. It's not really looking at how there's a unique experience here. It's only looking at one aspect. It's looking at dementia and the experience of the dementia. It's not looking at actually what is important for the individual, what is important for their queer identity. That kind of gets lost a lot in dementia research, because it's about how are we going to support the person with dementia, but it's not about how are we going to support the person to be the best queer person they can be, for example. And this is really an issue that's quite often missing. We've got dementia that a person may have the belief, is that Dementia may have the belief that a person is not trans or non-binary enough over medicalized views of disability and cognition. So, for example, people often view, sorry, that's not the clearest there. People often view that it's the dementia that causes somebody to be trans or non-binary, or we've got the traditional view that in intellectual disabilities or learning disabilities, that it's that actually means that somebody's non-binary, etc. You're not actually respecting that the person can have a learning disability or be neurodiverse, etc., and be non-binary, and that is absolutely fine. And we get this because of the over-medicalized medical view. We get the same with dementia. Again, if somebody's having a gender-neutral expression, or if somebody, particularly we get this within general LGBTQ plus stuff. You quite often, if you've got Frank in your care home and Frank's flirting with Paul, you say, oh, it's just the dementia, isn't it? He probably doesn't realise he's another man. Maybe Frank does, maybe Frank's bisexual. Same as gender identity. If somebody's expressing themselves, if Frank wants to wear a dress, you're like, oh, it's just the dementia, isn't it? No, maybe Frank just likes wearing a dress. Maybe Frank likes to mess with gender norms. So it's about really breaking this. And just because somebody's got dementia doesn't mean that that isn't a valid part of who somebody is. Therefore, we need a more affirming intersectional approach, that actually we need to really think about how the dementia is maybe impacting somebody, but also think about that actually somebody might have a valid gender expression too, and not let one overcome the other. And the need for gender neutrality to be offered as an option, like binary options, for example, in offering clothes. So we need to actually be thinking about gender neutrality and actually how somebody wants to present themselves. It's not about necessarily forcing somebody to be gender neutral, but not forcing somebody to be gender conforming either. And I always pose this question: surely it's better to celebrate somebody opposed to managing somebody. So even if, let's say, the dementia is meaning that somebody is being a little bit more gender neutral in the expression, they are maybe not worrying what they're wearing as much. To a certain degree, surely celebrate what somebody wants to wear, allow somebody to wear what they want to wear, other than actually managing what somebody wants to wear. Managing a person is obviously a far better approach, and it's a far more inclusive approach too. So these some things to have this really intersectional approach, that we are supporting the dementia, but we're also supporting who somebody is as well. And then you've got other aspects, so such as race, maybe cultural differences. We know in many other cultures, gender is seen totally different. So we need to also appreciate that there might be people from other cultures that see gender in a totally different way, and we need to be affirming and accepting of that as well. So that would really come into this affirming and intersectional approach. And then this is another concept. So one of my supervisors has done a little bit of work around this and really introduced me to this concept. And I think it's a really interesting point, particularly for LGBTQ plus people with dementia. So it's this idea of translocational positionality and looking at social context and how that works with that intersectionality. So translocational positionality addresses issues of identity in terms of locations where are not fixed but are context, meaning and time related, and which therefore involve shifts and contradictions. So this is really about social context. So it can be about environments, because environments aren't necessarily always fixed. It's about what we create in an environment and how the environment feels. And when we think about care culture, this is really what turned the light bulb on in my head, is this idea of care culture and how do we make care culture accepting. And if you've been to any of my other webinars where I talk a lot about heteronormativity and the central watcher and Foucault's panopticon, where you've got the central watcher and everybody alongside, and how people self-regulate can then be watched at any one time. And actually how we need to make that central watcher affirming so people self-regulate acceptance and take in and internalize acceptance. For me, if somewhere isn't that accepting, people's identities might change and intersect differently. And that is not a fixed, but it is a context. And it is very time related because it is very much about the time. So socially constructed views of gender and expression puts an emphasis on culture, and it can be care culture. And it's about if society is incredibly not accepting, which we're in quite a scary time for gender diverse people and for trans people. It's quite a hostile time politically, particularly in this country, the UK. There's a lot of difficulties. We've got a lot of social media issues. We've got the gender critical movement, which really does cause some upset to the community. And then you've got a lot of political issues, such as not looking at the Gender Recognition Act and saying that they were going to reform it and then refusing to reform it, etc. And a lot of stuff for LGBTQ plus people, generally like refusing to ban conversion therapy, etc. So it's quite a hostile time, and this is going to feed into care culture. And this is what we need to remember, is that when this feeds into care culture, for example, at the moment, a lot of the advisors within the government are telling public organisations, putting pressure on healthcare organisations to pull away from Stonewall's guidance, which is pro-trans, and asking them to actually be critical of being pro-trans. So we're kind of turning into a bit of a Section 28 around trans issues. And this is going to have a knock-on impact about care culture, and we're going to actually maybe have this difficulty around having positive discussions around some of these things and actually having this affirming culture. So actually people's view on their identity, people's relationship with being of their transness, of being non-binary, gender neutrality, is going to change within different environments, different cultures. And a lot of this is coming into care cultures. So we've got to remember that actually this is going to be quite a difficult time. And people may be coming out from being a safe space. They might have been around other LGBTQ plus people. However, when they go into care, they're probably more open to this hostile environment, and actually somebody's relationship with their identity could very much change. And that's what this translocational positionality really explores. So again, this next place here about not being in queer spaces, because you've got the safety, the context. It's not about the physical location of the queer spaces. It's about the feeling safe in the queer spaces, and then not being in queer spaces, how you might feel less safe. And we need to think about actually within non-LGBTQ plus care homes, and how this might be difficult for somebody living with dementia who is trans or gender diverse. We've got this idea of biological essentialism in health and social care culture. So this is that your biology dictates who you are. This is this over medical view of you and how your sex dictates who you are. And health and social care very much historically has been very sex focused and had this biological essentialism built within it. And this will have a massive impact on somebody living with dementia, they're gender diverse, because you've got quite often this view of we've got to focus on the dementia, and actually we're going to focus on the dementia based on what their sex assigned at birth is. I quite often see, for example, hormone medication being stopped due to polypharmacy, and that's really this biological essentialism, because it's about looking at the person, treating the person as the dementia, but really not respecting somebody's gender identity. And we've got the emotional labour being in healthcare and non-queer settings, and how having dementia might exacerbate this fear due to fear. So we've got to remember that obviously older LGBTQ plus people would have gone through some really horrific stuff in the past, and some of this might resurface, and going into healthcare settings, feeling scared, etc., it might actually really exacerbate a lot of these difficult opinions. And particularly when you are gender diverse, you've got maybe a gender neutral expression. So all of these things are some really important considerations to have, because this is really about what we need to think about when we are trying to be affirming. And actually, we need to somehow, it's about still, and the underlying message really is very similar to a lot of my other presentations. It's about making a culture accepting. Once we make a culture accepting, and again, we celebrate the individual, not try and manage the individual, we allow different options. We allow somebody to define their gender expression as who they are. We do not judge people. We're non-judgmental. We break down heteronormative assumptions. We do try and minimize the microaggressions that we commit. All of these things we can support with, and we can allow people to be their authentic selves. And I think it's sometimes about viewing gender very differently, and viewing gender as something that it's something very personal to the individual, and it's something we shouldn't be putting on somebody. And I think this is something really that we need to break that, and we need to break these, again, what was called a heterosexual matrix, or these heterosexual views of how somebody should be, somebody should act, somebody should present. So that is really my presentation. It's more of just a discussion around some concepts, some literature, and some ideas around really changing the way we view gender presentation in dementia, thinking about the complexities within dementia, and looking a little bit about care culture and how we need to make care culture far more accepting, and the impact on the individual and how it can cause somebody to change based on the care culture. So thank you so much for listening. And has anybody got any questions?
Fabulous. Phil, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to give people a few more minutes just to pop some Q&A in there. And also, if anybody wants to quickly jump over and leave us a review, I can see there's a couple of people left to review. I think we've got to have a minimum of 5 to do the draw tonight. So I'm just going to try and load these Q&A box now. But Mike, you've probably seen they've put me in a new room tonight. I'm had a bit of a whinge. I told Phil, they've put me in a new room. I don't know how to work this computer. It's very complicated. There's too many buttons to press. But I'm here anyway. So let me just share my screen, and then we'll give people option to put some Q&A in for you. And then I'm going to tell people what webinars we've got coming up. Why have they made this computer so complicated? I think Macintosh just make the computer so complicated to make people look more intelligent. I'm sure. Maybe anyway, there we go. So webinars coming up. I'll tell you what we have got coming up. We've got lots of webinars. In fact, we've got that many webinars, I can't possibly get them all on the Zoom presentation. But we've got April the 6th. We've just had a couple of webinars cancelled, unfortunately. Tomorrow night has been cancelled, unfortunately, due to some unforeseen circumstances. But we've got a webinar on the 6th of April on road traffic related injuries. And then we've got an amazing series. If anybody's interested in musculoskeletal problems, we've got an amazing series by, I think there's a consultant radiologist, Graham Kelly. So if you have got any MSK, occupational therapists, paramedics, physiotherapists, we've got an amazing series of them coming up. Critical care transfers presented by Scott Grier. Again, really, really good presenter. QI must knows in under 60 minutes. If you ever want to get into quality improvement, these two guys will teach you everything in under 60 minutes. And then we have got a webinar planned on a Saturday morning symposium where they will cover everything QI. Delivery of critical care in austere environments there on the 8th of June. 26th of March, recruitment healthcare leadership by Rusty again. And so please do jump over to the website. Just go over to cpdme.com/webinars and you can see all of them amazing and fabulous up and coming webinars that we have got coming up shortly. And so there you go on the screen, you can capture that and then you can go across and have a look at what we've got. Right, Phil, let's see if we've got any questions. So question from Haley, is there any formal legislation in place for care homes to make this topic mandatory? Oh, you're on mute, I think, Phil. I do it
Thank
all
you
the
for
time,
that. I'm on annual leave at the moment, so I haven't been in meetings recently. So I'm very easily out of the loop with the electronic stuff or technical stuff. But yeah, in relation to legislation, yes, you probably have the Equality Act, which we know applies to all of health and social care. And that very much looks at particularly the area that I'm focusing on today, probably be more gender reassignment, which really is the term that they use broadly for transgender. And due to the Jaguar Land Rover case that happened a couple of years ago, I believe now, it means that actually non-binary is generally accepted within the gender reassignment part of the Equality Act. So some of the key parts you can fit into it. However, we are really calling for really gender reassignment to be changed to gender identity, because we want it to be clearer and really encompass all aspects of gender expression and gender identity. So it is covered by that. However, it is quite vague, as with a lot of legislation. But moving away from legislation, regulators, particularly in care homes, I know the CQC are very interested in looking at LGBTQ plus support, LGBTQ plus provision, etc., and seeing that care homes are taking into account LGBTQ plus issues. So if you had strong policies in a care home looking at this and breaking down heterosexual issues, then at the same time that would look positive, and a lot of the homes that are again outstanding have positive LGBTQ policies. So it is something that they're looking at. I'm working with Skills for Care at the moment about putting together a framework for older LGBTQ plus people and helping them to put something around this together, which will obviously inform a lot of the work that CQC and a lot of work in the social care sector do. So it's moving there, but this is such an under-researched, such an underlooked area. There isn't much at the moment, but the hope is that more recognition for gender diverse people, particularly now that people are getting older, people are being more open to being their authentic selves, it'll become more prevalent and more at the forefront, if that helps.
Fabulous. Phil, I think you've done excellent tonight, because actually there is literally no more questions. However, I have just got, and I'm frantically trying to write them down. I've got 3 people now who's left us reviews, so I'm going to do a raffle. It's going to have to be a bit of an impromptu raffle, this, so you'll have to just stand by and bear with me, because I have no technology tonight. I only have streams of technology that allow me to do fabulous raffles, but I'm going to have to write them on a piece of paper and shuffle them up. And so thank you so much to Lisa for leaving us a review tonight. I will pop the links in again. Second, thank you to Jordan. Thank you to Leslie Ann. Thank you to Michelle. And also to Lauren. So I'm going to have to just do this, and I don't know if you can see this very well. I'm not very well prepared, because I come running in here like a whirlpool tonight. So I'm going to put them all into my hand here, and then again, anybody leaves a review tonight, I will literally pull another one off tomorrow. So £25 Amazon gift voucher will go to Michelle G. Michelle G, please drop me an email to andrew@cpdme.com, and I will send you a Amazon £25 gift voucher for joining us tonight, that you can obviously clearly spend on a book talking about tonight's subject, and then you can improve your learning. Maybe come on live chat next time that Phil comes on and does another webinar. So Phil, on behalf of myself and all the team here at CPDme, thank you so much indeed, because you are so lucky that you've got away with not very many questions tonight, which means we're going to finish a little bit early. Oh, you've gone mute again.
I'm doing it again. Yeah, I was thinking there's going to be a lot more questions, because there's a lot, but maybe I've just blown everyone's mind with some quite complicated concepts. But if anybody does digest it, and if you do have any questions, oh, have we gone? Oh no, people can definitely tweet me, or can tweet me any questions, and I'll happily answer them.
There you go. Well,
obviously, hashtagging CPD made simple.
Well, listen, you enjoy the rest of your annual leave. I can't believe you're actually dialing in tonight on leave, because that goes well against my NHS grain button, but I'll let you off because you're a favourable character. But Phil, thank you so much tonight. Thank you to all the people who joined us tonight for the webinar. Make sure you jump over to CPDme, download our app, and of course, register for the Up and Covered webinars. If you are working, stay safe out there. If you're not working, at home, kick off your slippers, enjoy the rest of your evening. Maybe pour yourself a drink of something nice, and I'll catch you soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Phil.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.